So when you think back to young Cole, little Cole, like 7, 8 years old, that kind of thing, thinking back to your favorite toys or activities as a child, what would you say that was?
Interesting. I was always well. First thing I thought about was basketball. Just as a kid, I loved basketball. Loved playing it. I loved watching it. That's kind of stuck with me my whole life. But I also love to draw. That was definitely, I think, my first in terms of me becoming somewhat of a creative. I think the early drawing was the first kind of flowering of that. And shortly, I don't know, maybe about a little after I started drawing, is when I found music, mostly listening to music for years. But those I would say those are the three things that shaped my life early on. With probably drawing being kind of the central creative outlet, and music coming a little later.
Were you a natural artist?
I would say probably yes. Comparatively to most people, I would say probably yes. I mean, I tend to compare myself to like people that are really good at like whatever I'm comparing to. So in that respect, no, I'm like a shitty drawer. But maybe compared to like a non-artist, I was naturally gifted, I would say, and that would continue for most of my life. I would say anything creative, I found a way to do pretty well.
Mhm. And while you were drawing, your dad was always playing music in the background. What was he playing?
Yeah, when I was young, it was definitely more like white people rock music, like
Billy Joel and
no, not
Bruce
actually. It was,
Springsteen.
it was more like U2,
Okay.
and Pink Floyd a little bit, and the Beatles was the one I remember. Like, I don't know if that's because he played it more, if that's just the one that resonated the most, but I just definitely remember hearing the Beatles really loud on the weekends when he was cleaning the house. It was like sticks like one of my earliest memories is the Beatles just like it was blaring, it was really loud.
Yeah.
So it's a very vivid. I have a horrible memory, but like those memories really stick with me.
And were you the type you could hear a song once or twice and know all the lyrics, or were you the type that barely you could hear a song 1,000 times and still you wouldn't know the lyrics? You
Yeah,
would just know the melody.
it's funny. It's the melody. Even to this day, like I don't listen to like even though I spend like so much of my time analyzing lyrics now, it's still not the first thing that I listen to when I listen to music. It's always the melody, production, the rhythm, everything but the lyrics is like what I naturally gravitate towards. Um, but yeah, it even from day one, it was always the music that drew me. I remember vividly like guitar solos, which is what led me to like really fall in love with Jimi Hendrix. Was not the song, was just the guitar playing was so out there and just like captured me so well, to the point that I was inspired to start playing guitar because of Jimi Hendrix. But it was the guitar solos that attracted me, not Purple Haze, what he was saying.
Mm. You mentioned seeing a photo of him kneeling over a guitar on fire. Where did you see this photo? What was that circumstance?
I can't really remember. I used to check out uh, like these VHS tapes when you can go to like a Blockbuster or whatever. We had a local video store by my house, and I would go there every weekend. I'd get to check out like one or two tapes every weekend.
Hmm.
I'd always pick it was either skateboarding or music, and like I think I want to say it was the some kind of documentary. It might have been Woodstock. I think it might have been Woodstock. Documentary, some kind of documentary that featured Jimi Hendrix, and it showed him all the various ways he like destroyed his guitar. And as a 10 12 year old kid, I was just like, oh, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. You know what I mean? Like kneeled over a guitar, like summoning the spirits as it's smoke is coming out of his red electric guitar. Just thought it was the coolest thing, as a kid would.
I'm not sure what your dad did for a living, but what was the philosophy or ideology that you remember your dad or your parents echoing to you as a child in terms of like, making it in the world? Did you have to work hard or be creative or, It's about who you know. Like, what were they talking about?
It was out of all those, it was definitely always hard work. Like my parents aren't creative. My mom's like crafty, but I wouldn't say she's artistic. And my dad, he loves music, but like doesn't have a creative kind of artistic bone in his body. No offense. He's great at other things, but so I was always a kind of an anomaly in that way. But and it was, yeah. So hard work was always both my mom and dad are like extremely hard workers. My sister became an extremely hard worker. I would say I'm an extremely hard worker. So that was something that always ingrained in me. The fight that I had with them though, constantly for a long time, they didn't quite understand my creativity. And so when I started to spend more and more of my time doing creative things, and then I decided that I wanted to do creative things for a living, is when the parent side of them, and now as a parent, I get it. The parent side of them started to push me, or at least try to make me think about that as a hobby and less as a career path, which kind of practically, logistically is the right kind of advice, or could be the right advice. And in retrospect, I'm glad they were pushing me that way, because I always kind of had backup plans, but it never weakened my resolve in what I thought I should be doing with my life. And so like the fact that I kind of didn't listen and was so persistent, despite them telling me you need to be doing something else, or at least have a backup plan, kind of validated my own passion, I guess, my determination in doing it, because I would have every excuse not to do it. And that would become, as I got older and older, and we're still working non-creative jobs, or to earn money, but yet having these creative outlets on the side that I still was pursuing, as something I wanted to do for a living. Yeah, I don't know, it somehow made me more resolute in my determination, if that makes sense. It's kind of contradictory, but I kind of look back and be like, oh, it was actually important that they were pushing me against it, so I can validate my own passion, in terms of like, yeah, why did I push against it so hard for so long? Well, maybe because I was kind of like, this is what I am supposed to be doing.
Well, at the same time, there are people who work hard at their passions and then they mail it in school. That was my case,
Right.
right? And there are people who work really hard in school and they just devote all their time to that. And they kind of use their passions as like a hobby or an outlet to release the pressures. So I'm wondering where you fell in terms of, because you would spend hours on end skateboarding and obsessed with the guitar for years and years. Did that translate to your schoolwork, that hard work ethic?
In high school, definitely not. I was just getting through high school. I For whatever reason, I mean, I love education now, but in high school, I was not. I don't know. Looking back, it's hard for me to know if I was just too young and immature to, or if I just kind of didn't had impassionate teachers, which is definitely a thing. But for whatever reason, I didn't get into education until later. But once I fell in love with education in college, I was like, I worked really, really hard, got really good grades, all that. So I found that anything that I've come to like, I always, work really, really hard at it. It's really hard for me to fake that though. So if I'm not into something, it's really hard for me to, if I don't care, like I won't work hard. That's just the reality of it, even though maybe sometimes I should. But, you know, that's another thing where the longer you live, you kind of realize like you will tell yourself exactly what you need sometimes. Like if you're intuitively not inspired by something and you aren't working as hard as you know you should, it's probably a reason for that, right? Like it's probably a sign that you might want to think about doing something else. And so kind of the older I got, the more I was willing to let that start to dictate what I spent my time with.
And did the pushback start when you dropped out of college, and that initial time you dropped out of undergrad to be in the band and all of that?
Yeah, so I was simultaneously going to college for I would say probably 3 years. I was just going to college to, I was just taking creative electives. I was taking all the art classes, all the philosophy classes, all the, literature classes,
Mhm.
um, film, music, or not so much music, ironically. It was, but so I was just kind of going because I wanted to go. I was just going to community college. And then, um, yeah, I was also in a band at the same time. And those things just, loved the band and I loved school, but I also knew I couldn't be dividing my time in that way if I wanted to be successful at either one. And so I made the decision to drop out and pursue the band that I was in at the time. And for me, like that was, and came to realize this wasn't everyone else, but like for me, dropping out of college and pursuing the band was a real thing. It wasn't like an excuse. I'm going to be in a band, and that'll be justify how I live this kind of lazy existence, which a lot of band people tend to do.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, it was like I need to write music 6 to 8 hours a day. Like that's how I'm going to succeed is if I just spend all my time like actually pursuing music, which meant practicing with the band 3 to 4 times a week, but also me, I would literally wake up and write music 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day sometimes. And so it was a very serious commitment. But yeah, that was when I had like the kind of heart to heart with my parents in terms of just like they were pushing. I wrote them this letter, kind of told them why I was dropping out of college, the way that I wrote the letter, the conversation we had after it. They had never since that day pushed me to try to do anything else. I think they at that point I was like 24 or something, 25, and they're like, okay. I think they're just like they got it. They're like, okay, we fought this long, and he's still doing it. I think they kind of recognized like it was, you know, I'd figure some things out for myself.
When you say write music 8 hours a day, if for someone who doesn't read music, how do you mean you were songwriting, or how would you write? What was your process like? Were you humming or
No, yeah,
playing,
it was that
recording
was
yourself?
the time that I had got my first laptop, and actually had a chance to compose music on like a Pro Tools or a Logic Pro, a music new music program for your computer where I could record myself playing piano, then I can write a bass line to it, I could write drums to it, and produce entire songs that I would then take to my band and kind of hand out the parts to my band members. And
Hmm.
so I was essentially what I learned, what I was doing was doing what a composer does for an orchestra or whatever, is where they write all the parts and then distribute those parts among the players, which would kind of pay off when I actually went back to college. But yeah, at that time it was literally just me at the computer or the piano, just composing songs that I would then take to my band to play.
Hmm. And were you still reading like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and studying history and all that at the same time, or not really?
Yeah, I was definitely, yeah, at that point I had a lot of time. I was just working a restaurant busser job, just like I think my rent was like $300 a month because I was staying in this essentially the back of someone's house, and like the tiniest, like
Under
almost
the stairs?
not. Well, yeah, that was part of it. That was one of them for sure. That was like $150 rent. So I just live in these like you know remote places, so that I only had to work like 2 or 3 days a week, and then the rest of the time I would be able to create music. So yeah.
What was your motivation at the time? Like, where did you see yourself going, and what was the sort of payoff during that period of time in your
Yeah,
in your mind?
at that moment, it was like I want to make it in a band. That
Mhm.
was the realist. That was the expectation that what I was working towards. Was like this band is going to be successful. At that time, it went like this was kind of at the advent of social media. So like we were putting songs on MySpace just to give the era kind of where we were working there. Facebook was not quite a thing yet. MySpace was the big thing. Um, but at that time, yeah, record labels were still the way to do that. So it was like we wanted to be signed. So we were writing albums, like writing, recording albums, playing shows every weekend. And the goal was to make it in a band, which ended up not being the goal after a couple of years of trying. And I did some other stuff. But at that moment, it was, I want to make it in this band.
What was your understanding of why bands fail and why they succeed at that time in your life? Like, what did you think you had to do? What needed to happen in order for you to make it?
Interesting, because everyone in a band, this is the hard part about being in a band, is everyone thinks a little bit differently, has different motives. And so there can be a disconnect in the way that you get successful. For me, it was work our ass off, um, write as much as we can, practice, become the best musicians possible, grind, and do it that way. For others, it became a little bit more about the lifestyle that comes with being in a band and the perks and stuff. And so I felt like after a while, I was the one working the hardest and maybe exponentially harder than everyone else. And so, but yeah, I mean, my idea was, yeah, you just write the best songs possible. And the only way to write the best songs possible is to write as many as you can and practice as much as you can. Like, just be a
Mm.
good band. If you're a good band, success will come, and not the opposite,
And again, at that time in your life, what in your mind, what was like a good song?
At that time, let's see. Or you mean like name a good song by another artist, or like what
No,
does
no,
a good
no.
song
When
mean?
you're writing your
Oh,
songs,
right.
you obviously have a formula, right? And you have an idea of what a good song would sound like or would be like. What were the elements of that good song in your mind?
Yeah, for that project, and it does have some parallels with what I ended up doing with Dissect, but it was
Yeah.
like there had to be an underlying meaning, like there had to be a message behind the lyrics, but the music, in my, like, for me personally, the music had to be interesting. There had to be some creative thing I could point to, but that's a little bit different. That's a little bit innovative, that moment or that chord or that whatever. And that's usually how I found like what songs I want, what ideas I wanted to pursue versus what ones I just kind of tossed aside. Was like, is there anything interesting or out of the norm in this chord progression or drum beat or whatever? And then, so there had to be meaning, there had to be innovation, but then, the kind of strategist in me is like, it also has to be kind of catchy, like there has to be some mass appeal. It doesn't have to be a pop Britney Spears hit, but it's like there's got to be something others are going to enjoy as well. Because I was, in the back of my mind, is like I always knew to be successful in music and actually have a career at it, it's like, yeah, you have to appeal to a lot of people. And so if you make experimental music, that's a narrows your path in terms of like getting far in terms of a career with music. And so I always try to balance between, being creative and innovative, but also still appealing broadly, to an audience.
Mhm. Okay, so around 26, 27, you decided to quit. Was there a straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak?
Yeah, I think so. I think I could point. So we would go on these, like, we didn't tour a bunch, but we did these like weekend kind of trips where we would try to book like a few shows out of town and kind of hit it Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or whatever the case may be. And we went one particular trip to San Diego, and yeah, all three of my band members just got fucking trashed afterwards, just wasted. And we were sleeping on someone's floor. And I just remember being the only sober one there. Like, I would drink occasionally, but I would never get belligerent or anything like that. And I was just felt like a babysitter. And I was sleeping on the floor. We'd probably eaten like whatever shit fast food that night. I was just like, nope, this ain't it. The, I can't handle even a couple more years of this. It was, that was definitely the moment. I love those guys, still love them, still talk to them, everything like that. But it was just like, with me working harder than everyone else and paired with, the lifestyle of, essentially making no money, and living in closets and all these things that I look back and think like, oh, those are kind of sacrifices that I was making to pursue this larger goal. It just became for me like I I I got continually worried about relying on other people for my own success, which, is kind of a double-edged sword in terms of like, you do need other people
Yeah.
pretty much anything that you do to be successful. But when you're so reliant on them, in particular being in a band or anything creative, it's like it became whereas like as business partners would these be my business partners? Like no way in hell. And so that combined with me wanting to go back to school and keep getting better at music and study music formally, and also I think I'd gotten married right around that time too, so it was like a culmination of things that came like, yeah, the band thing's probably not for me anymore.
You were also probably like pretending with your parents like everything was fine, right? They go, how you doing, Cole? Oh, everything is great. Meanwhile, you're eating Taco Bell and sleeping on the floor and making no money.
Yeah. I mean,
everything they said was going to happen ended up happening.
Right. Yeah, right. No, I mean, they were really supportive. They would come to my shows, everything like that, and ironically, I still look back at that band and think, yeah, if we would have kept going, we probably would have done something. The band was good. The last show we played was our biggest show we had, and we played with a nationally touring act, and which made it, well, I wouldn't say it made it more difficult to leave. I was ready to leave no matter what. But it wasn't like I was leaving nothing, right? Like I do feel like we had potential to do something, whether that was a sustaining career or not. Like I do believe we could have went somewhere with it, but life happened and I moved on.
Okay. All right. So you end up going to Cal State Sacramento, but sounds like you were broke. So I don't know how you ended up paying for that. And you said you faked your way into the music program. So what exactly does that mean?
Yeah. So at that point, I'd played music for over, I'd say almost 15 years ish, but I was self-taught. I think I took like 1 or 2 lessons when I was, part of me getting a guitar for my 13th birthday was I had to take lessons, and that lasted a couple of weeks. And I was like, I just wanted to be Jimi Hendrix, and my guitar teacher was like a flamenco guitar player. I was like, that's not what I'm doing here. And so I was always self-taught. I could see notes. I know what music notes were, but I didn't know how to read them. And so, as I started to think about like, how am I going to progress as a musician, I felt like I had maxed out on my own kind of self knowledge. Like I knew some theory. I didn't really know how to read music. Like I couldn't sit down at a piano and just play a piece reading it. And so I was like, oh, yeah, I need formal education. And so in preparation of thinking about going to college, I kind of like started to look at, oh, hey, how do I read music a little bit better? But yeah, so you have to audition to get into the composition program at most colleges. And so I ended up, so you have to audition, but as a composer, you can't really audition. So you audition as a performer first, and then you end up majoring in composition, but you also have to play an instrument. So I played piano. And so I tried out, my audition was a piece that I wrote, which kind of masked the fact that I didn't really know how to read music. And so I got into the program on a piece that I wrote, and then realized, very shortly after that I was just totally out of my depth. It was the experience of like knowing how far I was behind. Because when you don't know, you don't know. Like you don't know what you don't know. And there's this whole other world of like, I realized like all these musicians that I'm suddenly, in school with and classes with have been playing music formally for like since, junior high, and when they started playing saxophone and then took lessons and was in band through high school, and I had just no experience whatsoever with any of it. And so, yeah, me sneaking my way into the program was like getting in and realizing what the program actually was like an entirely different thing that I can tell you some horror stories about. But that's how I got in, was like playing a composition that I wrote myself, that so masked me not knowing how to read music.
And there was no reading music 101 class, because everyone should have already been reading music by the time you get there.
The lowest music theory course was like an advanced it is, it's an advanced course. It's not like here's the note A and here's what you know what I mean? It's like it's not that at all. So I was starting at zero pretty much, and everyone else was at what,
Hmm.
like seven or whatever.
So let me ask you this: if you don't know how to play music by ear, right? And let's say, like, I don't know how to play. I can't read music. I've never really played an instrument seriously. Would you and I be at the same level, or the fact that you could actually play instruments? Would you be a little bit, would you find that a little bit less challenging to go to a music school where everyone already knows everything?
Yeah, I mean, I was a good piano player, and I was a good guitar player, and you learn. I mean, it's like it's not like I was totally naive, like I didn't know what chords were or like
Hmm.
some music theory, and you know what I mean. Like you could just pick that up by learning other people's songs and be like, oh, I see why this works, and I see why this. You know what I mean? You kind of just tackle, So I did know some things. I don't want to be totally like I was just like, you know,
Yeah, of course.
but in terms of like that's way different than like formal training,
Mhm.
where you're learning, physical techniques, not only how to play your instrument but also sight reading. And that was the biggest hindrance for me, was just like seeing what the notes that are on the page and then playing them on the piano. It was like being where everyone else was fluent in a language, I was not fluent in a language. Or I was like looking at the dictionary to find the word for whatever Spanish word you're trying to say. That was me, like looking at the note on the page and then finding on my keyboard. Was just
Yeah.
not, because there's a huge disconnect there.
Yeah, I
Um,
was just thinking that because I'm learning Spanish right now and I'm translating three times in my head. I hear it, I translate it to English, and then I think about the Spanish response,
right,
right? And then I have to translate it from English to the Spanish response and then speak it all within like half a second. And it's like you just,
yeah, exactly. That was exactly me at the piano trying to read music.
what was the tuition situation?
Um, I took out student loans,
Okay.
pretty much that, and then me and my wife moved in with her mom. My wife went to nursing school while I was going to music school, and so we didn't have rent to pay, which was a huge blessing. I didn't have to work for the majority of the time I was in college. You know,
Still humbling though, right? Like moving into your wife's mom's place
yeah,
in
no,
your
yeah,
20s.
no, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Mhm.
It was, it's what I was pretty determined that what I was doing was right, the right decision. I didn't feel like I made a mistake.
Was this feeling you're describing now, it sounds like you kind of knew that this was your path, right? Was that the first time you felt that in your life, or had you felt that before and it was like a familiarity when you felt it again, and that made you sort of work harder and take those extra classes to learn how to read music and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think everything that I've ever decided to do felt like the right thing in the moment.
Mm.
Uh, and I tried to execute that thing as if that were the truth. You know what I mean? When I was in a band, that felt right, and that's why I pursued it at that time. I think, as everyone knows, as you get older, or just life evolves, like things change and motives change and all that, and you kind of have to be adaptive, while still staying true to that feeling. And the feeling that I was getting with the band was like, this is not right for me now. And the feeling that I got with, yeah, in theory, pursuing music formally, was the feeling like that's what I wanted to do. And it felt right when I did it, even though like it was extremely challenging and I almost dropped out because of all the factors of me being so underdeveloped. It's still, I didn't drop out. Like it still felt like this is what I need to be doing. And so that once I committed to that, it was like, I'm going to do everything that I can to make this to be successful. And so you kind of alluded to, I took the way that I was kind of able to make up my education that I was lacking, was I would take the 18 units required as a music major. And then on the side, I found these what are called the great courses, which they still have them, but they're essentially like uh, college level courses that you could take. You didn't get credits for them or anything, but they are college level courses taught by renowned professors from across the country. And I found this really great professor, Dr. Greenberg, who had all these courses on music. And so I downloaded, bootlegged all of the courses, downloaded them, and just took all the courses that was offered. And it was all for, introduction. It was all for like non-musicians. A lot of them were non-musicians. So it was like the perfect level for me, because it was all the theory stuff was explained in a way that my mom could understand. It was meant to be accessible to non-musicians. And so for my position, it was great because it wasn't technical, or the technical parts were explained in a way that, everyone could understand. And so I was taking all those courses on the side while I was taking the actual courses at college. And I did that for about 2 years. And by the second or third year, I felt comparable. I wasn't excelling as a musician, but I started to excel at the education part of it. I started to excel at the essay writing about music, and I started to excel about some of the theoretical stuff. I never became what I would feel like comfortable comparing myself to the pianist that I was, playing alongside during college. Right. Those people were on a whole nother level, musicianship wise, in terms of playing their instrument. I never got to that level, but I really started to excel in the more academic part of music, which what eventually led me to do Dissect. But
well, this is also the first time you guys were dissecting songs and getting context based on people's personal lives and the time they wrote this piece and the place where they played the piece. So you do a great job of breaking all this down in your TED Talk. But for the listener who hasn't seen your TED Talk, can you just give us like an idea of what that would look like in a typical, with a song, a Beethoven song or something that you guys would study?
Yeah, you would just, like any class of any subject, you'd have these more kind of open prompts of, writing essays. And, in music, it was, could be a Beethoven piece. I remember I wrote a piece on Dmitri Shostakovich, one of my favorite composers. And yeah, if you wrote a piece about, whatever, pick a piece, you'd have to research. You can analyze just the music, but what I discovered through college was like you would learn so much about the music by learning about the composer and the time that the composer was living in, what was happening during that time, where they were living, the things that were going on in their environment, personal life. Like researching all of that ended up paying dividends into the analysis of the composition. And you can really give the context of a piece through the context of the artist's life and the time they're living. I really started to love that process. I was always the person that began the essay the moment that they were assigned it. I wasn't waiting, procrastinating. Like I realized a lot of my, people are going to school with would procrastinate, and that, I'd be like halfway done with mine and they hadn't even started. And I remember thinking back and being like, or just kind of realizing in the moment that I was a little bit unique in that way. And I really loved doing this thing that other people didn't seem to love so much. But yeah, I felt like it made me a better musician and a better composer, because I kind of learned how to incorporate things larger than myself into the compositions by studying how other composers did that. I also learned how art could be a reflection of culture and society, where it's like you can learn something about more than the composition through the composition. And so you can learn, Dmitri Shostakovich, who was composing under Stalin's rule, I learned so much about USSR, Russia, and, all that through the compositions of Shostakovich, because he was living during that time and he was having interactions with Stalin and all this stuff. And I just really loved how it could be kind of the composition can be a wormhole into history and what you can learn about society, history, but also just what it means to be human. I mean, that's really the underlying foundation of all art, is like translating human experience into something creative. And so what I'm always trying to get at, what I learned to get at was like, yeah, what are the human truths in this great piece of art, which is one reason why art stands the test of time, I believe, is that because they have those truths in them. I really just got addicted to that kind of uncovering process because I just felt like I was learning so much for just personally about myself through these artworks that were composed like 200 years ago. It's like that's weird, but it was like, why? Well, we're human. We're all human. It's just sharing different human experiences that have this underlying kind of universal principles to them. I just really loved that about analyzing music.
I've heard the movie producer Brian Grazer. I think Ari Emanuel, the head of WME, talked about this too, about how they had dyslexia, and obviously no kid wants to be trying to read with dyslexia because you can't read, so they had to come up with workarounds, which helped them become sort of basically hustlers, like learn how to make things happen, through association or through networking or whatever, which then served them really well in their careers. And I used to teach yoga, and I joked that I was the stiffest yoga teacher in Los Angeles. I could barely touch my toes, but it turned out to be a unique advantage because it allowed me to really hone in on articulation and not rely on demonstration. And I'm wondering, in your case, not being able to read music initially and then having to go and study extra, looking back now, was that in some way a unique advantage for you as well?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Maybe at the time it didn't feel like that.
No, of course not.
Yeah, just because insecurities and, stress and all that. But
And you were also older too. So you had, you said,
yeah,
you mentioned that you would be excited about these essays. I'm sure the kids who were 19 and 20 were like, yeah, whatever, I got to go party first. But you were very focused. You were married. You were serious.
yeah, I think that was definitely a part of me working hard. I felt like I did outwork most people. But yeah, I think that had to do with me like being older, putting myself on the line to do this. Definitely forced me. Yeah, but yeah, it's an interesting question in terms of like your deficiencies being an advantage. I definitely think that they can. I think in my experience, yeah, I'm just trying to think of it exactly how that manifested itself because I do think it played a part. It might just be me like overcompensating. That could be one component of it, right? Like I'm deficient in these things, so I'm going to overcompensate in the things that I can thrive in. I'm going to really thrive in, which I think was a big part of it because I wasn't thriving so much in the actual playing of the instruments. I was just at too many years of a disadvantage there, where it felt almost hopeless to try to catch up in that way. Uh,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, I think part of me really excelling in the academic side of things was, yeah, that was an area that I felt like my deficiencies weren't a problem, and I loved it. I genuinely fell in love with it, and so um, I do think that definitely had some motivation there. I mean, we generally when we find success in something, it feels good, right? So we're naturally kind of incentivized to keep pursuing it. I definitely think that was part of me ended up excelling in the academic portion for sure.
So those essays you would get high marks on, even though you were playing catch up in the rest of the curriculum.
Yeah. I'd always get like the teachers would make make it a point to be like, this is really good. Like I had a few of those where they took the time to be like, this is you're doing above and beyond the expectation.
Exceptional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was always a even before when I was not going to music when the first time I went to college, like that was always the case too. Different subjects and stuff, but um, the essay writing was always something that I ended up just excelling at for whatever reason. My professors always kind of noted that like you're pretty good at this.
Mhm. Okay, so you graduate 2015. Gonna go be a maestro somewhere, or what was the plan, man? You just work your ass off,
Yeah,
getting this music degree, and you end up at a coffee shop.
yeah, that's yeah, exactly what happened. It was a debate between continuing school, which was master's, PhD was like really the only track as a music major. If you're not playing in, if you're not an active player, and even that, even there, it's really tough. And I was not good enough at my instrument to be a professional player. So really, the only now I was getting pretty good at composing. What we didn't talk about so much was that I was a composition major, so I was writing pieces. I was learning how to write pieces for orchestra, for different, ensembles, and was really, really like that. Although I wasn't as good as I was at essay writing, the academic stuff. That was always the strongest. But so after, it was after I graduated, it was, yeah, do I want to go back to school? Do I want to go back to school for like probably 6 more years, maybe 5? And at that point I was what, 28 or however old I was. And it was like somewhat daunting, to
What
commit
about
to.
getting the band back together? I mean, you're better you're a better songwriter now, right? You've studied composition.
Yeah, that could have been an option. Yeah, even to this day, I'm like not interested at all in that. Start. I mean, I did that for. I started my first band. I was in high school, and then I was ever since. So I'd done that for like over 10 years at that point. I kind of maxed myself out, I think. Um, and relying on other people was always scary, to be honest. Going back to that was scary. But yeah, it was a debate, and I kind of I got a job at a coffee shop, to just kind of buy time, to be honest. But then ended up falling in love with coffee, and that sent me on a whole other kind of wormhole of education and experience.
Was it
Uh,
nepotism? You saw an ad in Craigslist? Like, how did you get this job at the coffee shop?
well, I fell in love with coffee in college. I'd go to coffee shops to write or do whatever, and really fell in love with coffee as a consumer, and really geeked out on, at that point, like what I could in terms of self-education. Was buying beans and studying the flavors, and then I was started reading about like the history of coffee, like anything that I like, I ended up just obsessing on for a while. And then I was like, oh, I'll just get a job at this coffee shop that I've been going to, that I really respected and was doing really well, locally. And yeah, so
I've been
that.
to Temple before.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Where are
My
you from?
dad lives in Sacramento, so
Oh, cool.
I would go visit. I visited him a few times, and looking for a place to write or
Right.
whatever. So I found myself in Temple one day.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah. So I worked for them for 5 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, never. I ended up just not going back to college. It just felt too daunting at that point.
Now, did that feel like okay? So it sounds like you had a pretty decent job there, and you're doing all these interesting things, teaching coffee classes, etc. But did it, in the back of your mind, did it feel like you were settling, or did it feel like you were just incubating until the next thing kind of presented itself that felt the same way going to music school felt?
Yeah, I think I did. I genuinely fell in love with coffee, and I had kind of resigned myself to thinking that it could be a career path that I would be satisfied with. At that time, it felt like that. Um, I think looking back, it probably would have ran its course. I think I would have probably maxed out with that if I did it too long. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, there was always so when I got out of college, I had a job at the coffee shop, and then I was making music still. I self-released an album that I did all my own. Produced, mixed, mastered, everything start to finish was me. So I was still like,
Alternative rock, or what was the
no,
genre?
it was like electronic music combined with classical music was the idea.
Okay.
I was trying to fuse those two elements together. Not like
Mhm.
dance electronic, but more like ambient electronic, some hip hop influence, drums and stuff. So that was like, that was mostly me. Like I wasn't trying to make it. I never played a show.
Mhm.
Um, but it was just my kind of creative outlet at the time. And then that kind of ended. I was still making music, but it wasn't, you know, I was doing it less. And I just had a kid, or I was about to have a kid. And so, yeah, there definitely was a feeling that something was missing. I always had creative opportunities with the job that I had, but they were limited. and I wasn't making music as much. And that, yeah, definitely there was a little bit of time there where it felt like, yeah, something was missing. And I really missed writing is what I came to miss about college the most, actually, was I missed writing essays. And so that kind of, if you want to get into dissect, that's kind of where it started.
Well, you also came across the Serial podcast, right? That was like the first episodic podcast, a lot, myself included, a lot of us came across, and it kind of got us thinking, us creative types thinking about, maybe I could do something kind of like this.
That first season of Serial is a landmark in podcast history, to say the least. Probably the most important podcast season ever at this point, I think, because it was a watershed moment for the format, and a lot of people discovered podcasts through that season of Serial, and it was really well done. The limitations of an audio storytelling, or the perceived limitations of storytelling through audio. I think they broke a lot of ground there, and really proved that you can create captivating, serialized, long form content with just audio. And it was super compelling, just as compelling as watching a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people. We're good.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just like a lot of people, I fell in love not only with that show, but also the possibilities of the format. And like me, anything that I take a liking to, I'm always like, what if I did that? What would my version of that be? Like I just can't help myself. Anything that I end up liking creatively, like I can't help but start to formulate like what would my version of that thing be. Good.
You had a problem. You didn't like the sound of your voice.
Oh yeah, still don't. Like I mean, who does?
How are you going to navigate that with a podcast?
That was definitely like one of the initial mental hurdles, like I think anyone that's tried podcast, like it's a big mind fuck. Like having to hear your voice over and over. Like anyone that doesn't do it often will hear their voice on video or whatever and be like, that's what I sound like. Like everyone has that. Imagine that, like cutting hours of audio to make a show is like an existential crisis.
Right. So word on the street is you didn't think about it very much. You just started putting it together. I guess you wrote your first episode and went into your closet, recorded it. Is that how that went down?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. The story I always tell is like, I think it's kind of important because it's just, you just never know how things come together in like a way that you just would never predict. Because Dissect ends up representing everything that I've ever done in my life into one thing. If you told me like 5 years before I started the podcast, like you would be a successful podcaster one day, I'd probably say, what's podcasting? For one. Even if I knew what podcasting was, like how is that ever possible? Like I can't even imagine what that looks like. Yeah. So a couple of things all happened at once, which I could kind of try to briefly explain. So yeah, the biggest thing was I was having my first child. And so that's obviously changes your life more than anything. But I just remember one of, like I said, I have a terrible memory, but one of my most vivid memories is bringing my daughter home from the hospital the first day, and Kendrick Lamar's album "To Pimp a Butterfly" coming out the day after, the day we got home from the hospital. Kendrick Lamar had released this. What I was hearing was this fantastic album. So I put on headphones, was listening to the album while holding my daughter in her nursery while she slept. And it was like in the morning, super early, obviously in the morning, because the sleeping hours were regulated at that point. And so there's like sunrise coming through the window, like very picture perfect moment. Hearing this album for the first time, holding my newborn daughter in my arms for the first time, or at the house essentially, and just having this like really, really beautiful experience with the music and the emotions of your child being home. And that experience stuck with me. The album stuck with me. And I kept listening to it, and I was like, this is just fantastic. Like, it is incredible music. But then also I just knew that there was stuff being talked about. There was a story that I didn't understand. There's, certain lines or issues or concepts that I like, what is that? Like, what is he like, what is he talking about there? And I just kept listening to it, and it just became more and more curious about what he was saying. And that's when the kind of light bulb went in my head, was like, I want to learn more about this album. What if I studied it in the way that I used to study music in college? And that became the premise for what became Dissect, was that initial idea of like, what if I took this album as seriously as I used to take Beethoven or Shostakovich in college?
You said you'd also been killing time just scrolling through, I guess, Instagram or something at night, hours on end.
Yeah, no, that was another component of it, of just like not having that creative outlet, and you got to do something with your time. And I just felt like that was when Instagram was, first popular, and social media was really taking over our lives. And it was like one of the first time, well, probably the first time, this was 2015, 2016 the time we started to realize like these devices, this social media is can be toxic or can be wasteful, or you know what I mean? Like, it really gotten to a point where we were starting to realize some of the detriments of it. And I found that like I was spending, how I used to put it was like I was spending a lot of my time on a bunch of things, which means like just scrolling through Instagram, the next post, the next post, the next, but you're just, these microseconds of your life all accumulate to this. You'll spend hours on your phone, but you're not really spending any of that. Substantial amount of time is not being spent with any one thing. I was like, so that was kind of motivation of like, I want to spend my time like I used to, which was like dedicating myself to one thing rather than a million things. And so that again was inspired by Kendrick Lamar, and just really sitting down and like writing an essay about it. And then with the serial influence, was like, what if I formatted it similar to Serial, where it's a long form analysis, just like Serial tells a long form story, just broken up into these short episodes. And I was like, well, what if I did one song per episode? And by the end of the season, we have this comprehensive analysis of an entire 16 track album. It seemed like a consumable way to go back to my kind of comments about the music that I used to make, which was what I thought was meaningful, innovative, but also accessible. That was the kind of accessible component of the podcast, was like, yeah, we're going to do a 13-hour analysis of one album, which sounds pretty daunting on its own, but yeah, we're going to break it up into these 30-minute episodes. And so
you got this amazing idea, right? But you also just had a kid. So did you get any pushback from your wife or your parents? Anybody saying, look, Cole, look, it's hard having a kid, and you can't spend your free time working on some passion project, anything like that? Or were people pretty supportive?
I don't think I told anyone about the podcast aside from my wife, until it came out, or it was about to come out.
Was that intentional? Like, you just didn't want to hear it if anyone had anything to say?
It was mostly because I wasn't really doing it for anyone else. Like, it really started as a passion project. Like, I needed that creative outlet filled. I wanted to do a study of Kendrick Lamar's album. Personally, I just wanted to learn more about that album. And so I truly didn't do it for anyone other than myself. Like I always say, if I were trying to start a successful podcast, it would not be a 13-hour analysis of one album. Like, that's not the one that sounds like it would be a hit, right? Like, not at all. So it really was about me just getting back into something creative. And then the act of publishing it and conceptualizing it as a podcast. I mean, of course I would want people to listen to it, but it was mostly just me like making sure that I followed through with the thing.
Right.
Like, I think, at least for me, the imaginary audience is really important. Knowing that someone is going to hear this eventually, you're going to share this eventually, rather than just me writing about the album with no structure, or whatever, it was way easier, more manageable for me to yeah, have this concept and fulfill this concept and give me kind of a goal to work towards. Otherwise, it'll just be kind of aimless writing, I think. So just conceptualizing that way is also exciting. Like, oh, I'm going to make this podcast and learn how to do that. Like, it was fulfilling all those creative juices that I was missing. But yeah, it's definitely not the one that wasn't trying to be successful, in the beginning, at least.
So you brought together music composition, theory, history, culture, philosophy, all the things you'd been essentially passionate about in your life. I'm curious, where did the experience at the coffee shop come into play? I know you were like a creative director there. Did that play a part in maybe coming up with the logo, or like what did that end up translating as in Dissect?
Yeah, I think the marketing experience there really helped, actually. I found myself to be pretty good at social media, so much so that I ended up doing it for the company that I was working for, Temple. And we had really good success. That was when Instagram was taking off, and coffee photos specifically was, in the early days of Instagram, was a huge trend. I'm sure you remember.
Mm-hmm.
So we really capitalized on that trend, and our Instagram account exploded, especially for that time. And I really learned how to navigate social. As much as I knew the double-edged sword of social media, I also understood the utility of it. And so when I did end up conceptualizing Dissect, packaging it as a product and then selling it on social media, I ended up doing that pretty well with Dissect, and continue to do it pretty well with Dissect now. And so that was definitely something I took from. That's more logistic. I mean, creative. There's some creative aspect to social media for sure, but there's also a marketing strategic part of it, which I was kind of forced to learn by doing social media as my job for Temple. Definitely got some reps in there and figured out the algorithms and all the ways to get yourself out there, which really helped with Dissect eventually.
Okay, so I started this podcast in 2020. We recorded maybe 5 or 6 episodes. The audio was horrible. I almost didn't release it. I was like, I just can't, because all you hear are the mistakes. You don't hear like the great content. Yep. So what was your version of that? Did you have to like redo anything? Were there challenges that you just were, other than your voice, obviously? Was there anything else that you just think was boring, or what was your feeling launching it?
Yeah, it was, I think I was mostly like, I was good at the audio stuff because I had done that for years, like
Mm-hmm.
the technical aspect, which is a big hurdle for a lot of people, was not one for me. It wasn't anything fancy. I had $100 microphone and GarageBand or Logic on my Mac, but you don't really need anything fancy for podcasting. So that component was not the issue for me. It was mostly getting the format in a way that I thought was entertaining. Making sure there's the music clips and the analysis were kind of spaced out in a way that was flowing. But the biggest hurdle for me was definitely my voice. I just never felt comfortable. I'm naturally low energy and monotone. Like, just that's the way I am. Just in real life, that's who I am. And so I didn't think that would be entertaining for people. I thought people would get bored. And I hadn't yet realized that podcasting is at its best when you are yourself, whatever that is. And so if you listen to like the first couple of seasons of Dissect, you'll hear me playing with my voice in real time. If you listen to season 1 versus season 2, I have a different voice, especially season 3 from season 2, totally different voice. And it's me trying to overcome this insecurity of my voice being monotone. And I'm like trying to be animated in all these different ways that I look back on now and just be like, sounds so forced and bad. And even just in the last couple of years, and I've now been doing this like 7 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
Only by season, I want to say season 7 is when I really started to feel like I was just being myself. I'd finally found my voice like over 100 episodes in, where I just felt comfortable and really, I realized that like people were connecting to me personally very fast in season 1, but I didn't really let that manifest into the creative of the show in terms of me just trying to talk naturally while I read the scripts. Like, it's such a simple concept now that I'm just like, why did it take me so long? But like, That's all I had to do was be myself, read how I normally read or talk how I normally talk, and it's going to be fine. People will pick up that that's my natural personality. But that was it. That was the biggest hurdle, not only publishing the podcast, but just for years after even having success with Dissect. The success actually brought more pressure to be more entertaining, which then led to me playing with my voice in all these weird ways that I cringe at now.
So a couple of questions about your process. You write everything. You write a script basically, and um, can you walk us through that process, just in terms of the time you're investing? Your analysis. I mean, you offer a lot of interpretations. I'm curious, how do you find these interpretations, right? Like, are there other people who've done this that you borrow from? Are they all original for you? Like, do you have to sit with a song, you can play it 20 times in order to realize Kanye is saying suicide versus, you know, whatever he was actually saying? Like, how do you gather these insights?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a combination of a lot of things. There's initial research process that starts before I even write anything. So I'm researching the artist, the album, finding out all I can, listening to all the interviews. And so you kind of build up this well of knowledge going before I even start writing a word. And all that will help inform the interpretations when you get to them. Because what I try to do is, of course, there's like subjectivity in what I do. I mean, it's inherently subjective. I am not the person that wrote this music. And so whatever I say is my interpretation. That's it. There's really no facts aside from, you know, here's when it was made and, you know, blah, 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 here's who made it. But I tried to, context for me is everything. And so context historically, context about the artist, context within the song, it's the song and album itself, how one line can lead to the next, or you see one theme develop throughout the entire project, which then would inform a certain line. And so I always try to justify the interpretation through context. And I do that through research and just, thinking broadly about these things. And so when it comes down to the actual analysis, it's really as simple as me copy and pasting the lyrics onto a document, starting with the first line, writing about the first line, writing about the second line, seeing if there's any connections with the previous line, and then it all kind of just builds on itself. And you can imagine that throughout, you know, an entire album, how one song, how one line can lead to the next. And you kind of start to develop like, oh, that connects to this thing, or that connects to this thing, or this artist has a tendency to do this thing lyrically. Oh, he's doing it again here. And so you just notice patterns, connections, and really trying to bring them all together in a way that's smooth, entertaining, and like cohesive, you know, all the disparate elements you're trying to just like fuse, doing a service for the listener and just presenting the information cleanly where it feels like I'm not reaching all over the place, you know, and that you're justified in the interpretations. But at the end of the day, they are just interpretations, you know.
Do you, are people like Stephen Pressfield, the writer, and Elizabeth Gilbert talk about the muse and how the muse kind of feeds you ideas? I'm curious, do you get to a point after sitting with the song for so long that it starts speaking to you and like it tells you what it means or what it could mean? Is there like a line between your intuition and whatever research you've done?
I will say, yeah, I mean, there's like revelation moments, and maybe that's kind of how you're framing it. Where it just clicks. There's definitely some moments that I've had where it's just like everything, oh, that's it. Like that's the thing. So there's definitely that. And when I really I feel like I've really got to the heart of the song. Mm-hmm. That's when, if you want to say speaking to me, that's when I feel the deepest connection with it. When I realize what I think is going on, what I think the message is, or the expression is, and then what it could represent for the album, but also again, like going back to the human experience, like what is it conveying about the human experience? Like those are the things that I really get excited about, and I feel connected to the artist through. So I definitely develop a pretty deep relationship with the artist and the album that I analyze. You know, I'm spending months of my time dedicated to them, so it's only natural that I start to feel a connection to the music. So much so that most of the albums that I dissect, I don't end up listening to a lot. And it's not because of fatigue, it's just because when I put the album on, the relationship is so heavy that it's like it's hard for me to just listen to the album. You know what I mean? Because the connection is so deep that it's almost like I have to just that's the only thing I can do is just listen to the album. I can't be doing anything else because yeah, it just kind of conjures up a bunch of thoughts and emotions when I listen to those projects back.
Lauren Michael, the producer of Saturday Night Live, says we don't go on when we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30. In other words, they need that deadline because
Yeah.
they're hardly ever ready. And I imagine in your endeavor, your creative endeavor, you can keep going another layer deep and another layer deeper. And how do you know when to stop and say, okay, this is enough. I have enough context.
Yeah. It's not as challenging as it might sound. Yeah, because you don't really, what I try not to do is inject myself too much into the show.
Mhm.
So in moments, and when I do that, I try to be very deliberate and like I am taking a detour here, like come with me on this detour. But for the most part, I'm just trying to get at what the artist is saying. And I feel like if I'm looking too much into it, and if I'm getting too overboard with the interpretations where they become so distant from the source material, I feel like that's me injecting myself into the show, where the ideas become more about me and less about what the artist is saying. And that's really what I'm trying to convey or showcase is like, what is this human being saying to us? What is this human being communicating to us? And again, yeah, if I get too far off in my own crazy analysis, I feel like it veers away from what the artist is saying. Not to say that like a Kendrick Lamar doesn't have all these layers, but I intuitively have a feeling of where I'm like overstepping and injecting myself too much. I feel like an intuition there, and so when I feel like that, if I feel like I'm doing that, I start to back away from it.
Mhm. And talk about the reaction or the response you get from the listeners and also the people who now want to collaborate with you. Like, how did you navigate all of that? Were you checking the numbers every day, or were you just surrendered to it and said, it'll be what it is? What was your attitude?
It's definitely a journey. It still is a journey in terms of in the beginning, of course, it's very exciting. People are like the thing that you're doing. And so any least like in that first season, I didn't have that many listeners, but starting from scratch, even getting a couple hundred listeners feels really good.
Mhm.
And once in a while you'll get an email and like someone will say, I really enjoyed this, whatever. Um, and so early on, I started to get some of those, and it's encouraging. It definitely helps you with the work, and especially with a show like Dissect, which is a lot of work. Um, every episode's like a 6,000 page script, or 6,000 word script. So it's a lot of writing and research and stuff. So in the beginning, it was great, and then season 2 is when it really exploded with the Kanye season.
Yeah.
And that's when things just kind of took off faster than I knew what was happening type thing. And that's when the numbers started to really jump. And that's when I started to get outside interest in terms of like having, deals, podcast companies reaching out, like, can we bring Dissect into our network? And me really feeling like this was a legitimate opportunity to like make a career doing something that I created and that I loved, which has been like this whole conversation is about me working towards the same goal in different iterations, which was like doing something creative that I loved for my job. Was like the underlying goal of all of my endeavors was like that's what I want to do, and I hadn't found that yet. And so when it became a real opportunity and a real possibility, it was like very exciting, but also really really nerve wracking. Uh,
Mhm.
and by the time season 2 ended, I had joined Spotify, and was able to quit my job and formally make Dissect my full-time job, which was definitely like a career, like as a life goal fulfilled. I was extremely happy. It was surreal. Um, it was just, yeah, 20 years of work in different iterations to get me to that point of being able to do that. But the thing that I don't know. You don't hear talked about is what happens after that, which
Yeah.
is, I think, really interesting. And at least
Mhm.
my experience of it was really interesting because when you're working toward a goal, you don't actually imagine what's on the other side of the goal because you're so determined on accomplishing the goal that it kind of blinds you to anything after that. And so when you get it, it's like there's a there's an exhalation, but then there's a, I don't know, like you've been working towards this thing your entire life. Now what? You know, what's what's the next thing? Or is there a next thing? Like what it's a real kind of, yeah, I don't know. It definitely threw me for a loop because I was really happy and ecstatic to do that thing. But then a few months after that, I was like, almost felt like I was missing something. Even though I love doing the show still, I am still passionate about doing Dissect. But at that moment, it was just like, wow, it's kind of weird. It was just a weird, really weird feeling, almost like an empty feeling afterwards that I didn't really expect. You hear artists talk about it all the time in the music, but
Mhm.
until you experience it, you don't really understand the concept of. I wouldn't say I was unhappy at all, but I was the the emptiness, the post success emptiness is like a real thing, which is
Mhm.
as if you haven't been on the other side of it yet, it's like it's hard to imagine until you experience it, I think.
One thing I want to note about the podcast, the Spotify deal as well, is you said these other people who wanted to collaborate you, a lot of them were well-meaning, but their vision of what they wanted and what you wanted didn't always align. And you said that Courtney at Spotify, the way he articulated what your mission was like right in alignment with, and that was one of the indicators that helped you to know that this is the right deal for you at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Dissect's my baby, it's like this thing
Mhm.
created and worked really hard and was getting success. So you become very protective of it. I found like you would think getting all these opportunities, you just say yes because it's like, oh, finally someone wants me. But I found myself doing the opposite where I was like, what do you want? What are you trying to do with my thing? Like I was very hesitant. Like, I was exploring opportunities, but if they weren't I wasn't saying yes, which I actually something I try to talk about for any aspiring creatives is like saying yes to the right things and saying no when it doesn't feel right. Because the temptation to say yes because people are giving you attention will be very strong. And so you kind of jump at what could be bad opportunities just because you have an opportunity. And what I intuitively knew, and maybe it was just because I was a little older too, was just, yeah, I got to be this could be my one shot and I don't want to fuck it up. And so I definitely declined some opportunities that I think if I were younger, I probably would have said yes to, and that would have not been as, who's to say what would have happened, but I don't think it would have been as successful as me joining Spotify. But even it wasn't even about Spotify because when I got that call, I was just like, well, one, it was really surreal, but also they weren't really doing podcasts at the time. So I was like, what are they really, what, you know what I mean? What are they going to really offer me? And that's when Courtney, one, he understood the show. Everyone,
Mhm.
most of the people I talked to didn't really understand the show. They just saw it was charting on iTunes and they just wanted a piece of it.
Mhm.
Courtney articulated what the show was, why it was special, why he believed in it, and on all the things he was going to help me with. And the biggest part was like he didn't want to change the show at all, which was true, and it's still true to this day. Spotify has never asked me to do anything that I didn't want to do with the show,
Mhm.
and so I believed him. I felt good. There was an intuitive, good feeling about the conversation I had with him, and it ended up panning out pretty
Mhm.
perfectly for my situation.
And how did you end up navigating that lack of fulfillment after the deal? Did it come back when you started doing more seasons, or how does that work?
Yeah, it was just for me it was just something that I needed to think through, I think, more than anything. Um
Mhm.
and just realize that I was doing the thing that I've been working towards, and that was the fulfillment. That was the sustainment of the success was now the goal, not getting to, you know what I mean? Like preserving the baby was the thing now.
Mhm.
What I'm still doing now is like the challenge of Dissect now is me staying excited about it, not having it feel like work because it is my work, um, and just making sure the show is as good or better than it, was at any other time in its history. You know what I mean? And not burn out or feel like I'm going through the motions. And so
Mhm.
I've had to learn to, challenge myself in new ways. Did some side shows, side projects here and there, with other shows, and you know, but Dissect's still the main thing that I'm doing the exact same thing that I was doing when I was started the show, the first episode. But the process is pretty much the same. Like you see now, I still record in my closet. Um, all that was like intentional. Because I didn't want to veer too far from what got me here in the first place. And so I felt like if I had this huge team helping me, if I started recording at a studio and you know what I mean, like all these things that would take the show. I don't know. I just wanted to stay true to what it was, which was, you know, writing about music and recording it.
Mhm.
Simple as that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you've dissected Kendrick, you dissected Frank Ocean, Kanye, obviously, Tyler the Creator, Mac Miller. These are all artists that are a bit complicated and troubled, or in one way or another. Is there a formula to the way you choose the artists that you end up dissecting?
Yeah. I guess there's consistent elements that I think about, which you can call a formula, I guess. So what, like the first thing is like, I kind of have to like the album, there's some that I veered away from that when I collaborated specifically with season 7 on Because the Internet by Donald Glover. I wasn't in love with that album, but I found someone that loved that album and we collaborated, and then I ended up loving the album through the process, which was really cool. But for the most part, like I kind of have to love the album. I'm about to spend 6 months of my life with it. So, you know what I mean? I have to have some connection to it initially. I do focus on like bigger artists, and that's just one, somewhat strategic, just in terms of like an audience, but also like I'm really interested in the people that are shaping culture, that have big influence on what's happening historically right now. Who are the artists that we're going to look back on? Like we're looking back on Beethoven, and I try to choose, for the most part, with some exceptions, no, that's Kanye, that's Beyonce, like that. I can guarantee you in 200 years, the people that we're talking about now are going to be Kanye West for sure, going to be Beyonce for sure, going to be Kendrick Lamar for sure. I would bet my life on those three artists being the ones, some of the ones that make it historically. So I try to have, that's kind of what I'm. Part of the premise of the show is like giving the artists that will last in that way respect now and study them now as if they were dead for 200 years, like the way that we study Beethoven.
Mm.
Um, and so that's part of it. And then part of it is, does the album itself have enough thematic stuff going on that's going to carry an entire season? There's a lot of great albums that I like that I don't actually think would make for a great Dissect series, just because there are not enough meat on the bone, so to speak. They can't. It's a lot to undergo a 13-hour analysis of your album, and so to have an entertaining and thought-provoking season, there's got to be enough ideas and lyricism and musicality in there to sustain that kind of analysis, where some albums will fall short. However great they are, there are certain albums that work for the format that I've created, and so I tend to focus on those, which are
Is
big.
that why? Is that why you haven't done Kid A yet?
Yeah, pretty much. That's like probably my favorite album of all time, with along with To Pimp a Butterfly. But it's like there's like 8 words per song. He was literally pulling lyrics out of a hat, so the lyrics kind of don't mean anything. And so
Is
it's
that
like,
real? That's what they do? They pull
yeah,
lyrics out of a hat?
for that album specifically, and there's reasons for that are interesting, but it's like that's
Hmm.
5 minutes of the pot. You know what I mean? That'll take 5 minutes to explain, and then what? And then what? You know what I mean? So it's like I want to do a Radiohead album, but it won't be that one, just because unless people really want to hear like some really fucking technical music theory, which there's some of that in the show, but I dose it out in pieces because I don't think it can get that technical and people will be interested.
How do you Having achieved this massive goal of having this full-time job, doing you're sole creator of this thing. How do you thinking about success these days, especially since you got the thing and found that it didn't make you more fulfilled, at least initially?
I feel successful, generally speaking. Uh, and I think that just, I'm doing something that I feel is meaningful to me and hopefully to others. It just feels the work that I get paid to do, I feel like is meaningful. And I think that's what I've always wanted. If I could boil it down, talk about it being creative, but I think the concept, if you make it more ambiguous, is more universal. And so like it's finding meaningful work. Hopefully you get
Mhm.
paid. But even beyond that, finding meaningful work in your life, I think, is what makes you successful. You might get paid for it, you might not. That's to me what I've defined as success. You know what I mean? Like whenever Dissect crumbles and I don't do this for a living, like I imagine that scenario a lot. It gave me a lot of anxiety for a long time. Because that's another thing you think about when you find success is losing it. Like losing,
Mm.
like I had looking back, I had real anxiety about that for probably a good 2 years, where it would literally keep me up at night, or I'd wake up at like 2 a.m. like freaking out. Like, what am I going to do when this thing crumbles?
Are you
Uh,
on a contract for a certain number of years, or how's the deal structured?
no, it's just I'm like technically an employee, so like, but they could cancel the show at any, you know what I mean? It's up to them. So it's not like it's never been X amount of seasons. It's
Mhm.
been more of a, I guess, a non-spoken agreement of as long as it's successful, we're going to continue it. I don't, why not? That's at least what I assumed about the partnership,
Mhm.
um, and how it's played out to this day. But yeah, I don't know. I think I found solace in the idea of Dissect going away one day, only because I know that I will then try to find what I know about myself is that I will not be satisfied until I find the next meaningful thing, so,
Mhm.
and I know if that's my goal, I'll find it, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I find, I guess that's what I've
Yeah.
defined as success
Impact.
for me. Or not
Yep.
even,
Something meaningful for you, but also something that could be meaningful for others as well.
I mean, usually when the thing is meaningful for you, it's because it's meaningful for other people, I think, right? So like
Yeah.
symbiotic in that way naturally, which is nice for the world, I think.
Why do you think we still listen to artists like Beethoven, hundreds of years later? What was it about their compositions that have stood the test of time? Or is it something a little more political than that?
I think it's both. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's definitely conversation to be about like what we have chosen to preserve as a culture and how that stems from other shit, right? Like we study white male artists and that reflects our culture, right? Like so there's that component, but I don't there's part of me that doesn't like saying that because it does undermine artists like Beethoven, who I don't care, male, female, like his music is fucking brilliant. And so the music stands on its own. There are also political components and social components that go into how the filter has filtered historically. But I'll stick with the music. The music is just, I think, well, part of it, again, academia is the one that kind of preserves these artists. So there's that conversation too. But Beethoven, like the greats are great for a reason. You study them and you realize, yeah, they've stood the test of time for a reason. There are probably others. I think that's probably maybe where the conversation should go. Is there are others that probably should have been preserved that have not been, but the ones that have been preserved for the most part are also justified in their preservation. Um, but again, I not to sound like repetitive, but I do think we intuitively connect to meaningful work and something that educates us about our experience on Earth. I think all the great artists, when you really get into it, communicate that in some way, whether that's intrinsically, like, Beethoven doesn't have words for the most part. Some of the operas do, but I feel like that's the magic of music to me, is that things can be communicated without language. And I think we emotionally resonate on some weird level that I don't have words to describe, but we all feel it and know it. That someone was able to represent an emotion or an experience accurately and abstractly through art. I think that's kind of the universal thing across all art mediums. It's like the things that really stand the test of time, or one, innovative. So they have pushed boundaries of the art form. And that's why we study them, because we can draw a line between Beethoven before and Beethoven after, and the effect Beethoven had on all music going forward, a dramatic effect. That's why we can say the same thing about Kanye West. Like, it's kind of the exact same thing. And I think so there's an innovative component, but on top of that, and probably I think more importantly, is that, yeah, there's a communication, there's an accuracy of communication that we just all feel intrinsically. And that resonates differently with different people. But for the most part, I think there's some kind of, they just tap into something universal that I think a lot of people resonate with. And again, that doesn't have to be Beethoven. That could be whoever it is for you. It's going to be different for me. But there are these artists that kind of seem to capture more, and that we generally gravitate towards as a culture, almost. They're just doing something a little extra that is kind of defies explanation in some ways. If that makes sense.
I want to echo something you wrote in season 2 about Kanye, where you said, and I'm going to, hopefully I'm saying this from memory, but talent hits a target that no one else can hit, and genius hits a target that no one else can see. It's a Schopenhauer quote.
Yeah.
And so what you just said reminded me of that. But then I want to quote you now. In the same season, you said that one of the lessons that you learned, or one of your mantras, was the world gives you nothing until you give it everything.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that quote actually just takes me exactly back to that time in my life, where I did feel like I was giving it everything. I was maxed out at that point. There would have been no season 3 of Dissect if I wasn't able to do it full time. I was working 8 hours a day. I was coming home, spending time with my newborn baby and wife. They would go to sleep and I would work on the podcast. I'd get up early and work on the podcast, go to work, repeat. Like, I was exhausted by the end of season 2. That statement rings really true about that time in my life, where I felt like I was at some sort of finish line. And I had given it everything that I could at that time in my life, to that point in my life. And, it's one of the things, my personal experience was that it worked out, and I hope that the same is true for everyone else. But I tried really hard. I tried really, 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 really hard for years. And it wasn't just Dissect. It's everything else that led to that. It was just me never giving up on that initial dream of doing something that I loved and created for my job as a living, as my full-time thing. And just, yeah, I can say that statement is true. I felt that was the truth in my experience.
Beautiful, man. I think that's a great place to end it. Appreciate your time, Cole. Thanks so much for your transparency and sharing your story. And the next time I'm in Sacramento, I'll reach out and let you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was great.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.